The iron bars of her cell rattled as Madeline Lewis slumped against them, her once vibrant emerald eyes dulled by weeks of unjust imprisonment. Dust motes danced in the thin beams of sunlight filtering through the jailhouse window, illuminating her torn dress and the dried blood on her wrists from where the shackles had cut into her skin. Outside, the small town of Redemption Creek continued its daily bustle, seemingly oblivious to the innocent woman languishing in their jail, accused of a crime she didn't commit. The year was 1875, and in the rugged territory of Wyoming, justice was often whatever the local sheriff decided it would be. For Madeline, that meant being locked away on trumped-up theft charges after rejecting Sheriff Harlan's unwanted advances. At 24, she traveled west seeking opportunity after her parents' deaths left her alone in the world. Instead, she'd found herself at the mercy of a corrupt lawman who saw the law as his personal tool for vengeance. "Water, please," Madeline called out, her voice raspy from thirst. The deputy, a young man who seemed uncomfortable with her imprisonment but too afraid of the sheriff to help, slid a tin cup through the bars without meeting her eyes. "Sheriff says your trial's in 3 weeks," he muttered. "Judge is making his circuit." "We both know there won't be a fair trial," Madeline replied softly. "Not in this town, not with him." The deputy had no answer for that, shuffling away to resume his post at the front desk. Madeline sipped the tepid water slowly, knowing it would be hours before she received more. The sound of spurs jingling against wooden floorboards announced Sheriff Harlan's return, and Madeline instinctively retreated to the far corner of her cell. "Still looking mighty pretty for a jailbird," Harlan drawled, his thick mustache twitching as he smiled. "Might be willing to drop those charges if you'd reconsider my offer." Madeline glared at him with what strength she had left. "I'd rather hang." "That can be arranged too," he replied, his smile never faltering. Though it'd be a waste of such a fine, the jailhouse door swung open, cutting off Harlan's threat. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the harsh afternoon sun, the distinctive shape of a cowboy hat atop his head. As he stepped inside, Madeline could make out a weathered face with keen blue eyes and a strong jawline partially obscured by several days' worth of stubble. Dust covered his worn denim and leather attire, suggesting he'd ridden a long way. "Help you, stranger?" Harlan asked, his hand casually resting near his holstered pistol. "Name's Flynn Quinn," the newcomer said, his voice deep but measured. "Passing through town, heard you had a prisoner." His eyes flicked to Madeline, then back to the sheriff. "That's right," Harlan replied. "Dangerous thief." "Why's it your concern?" Flynn removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with sun-lightened strands. "I'm looking for hired help for my ranch outside of Laramie. Thought maybe you had someone working off their sentence." Harlan laughed. "This ain't one of them Eastern rehabilitation programs." "She's facing serious time." Madeline watched as Flynn's eyes assessed the situation. She could tell he wasn't fooled by the sheriff's bluster. There was an intelligence in his gaze that gave her the first flicker of hope she'd felt in weeks. "What exactly did she steal?" Flynn asked casually. "Valuable items from the mercantile," Harlan replied vaguely. "Plus, she assaulted me when I tried to arrest her." "Is that so?" Flynn turned to Madeline, addressing her directly for the first time. "You seem a bit slight to be overpowering the sheriff here." "I never stole anything," Madeline said firmly. "And the only assault was his hands on me when I refused his advances." The deputy suddenly became very interested in the paperwork on his desk, avoiding Harlan's glare. Flynn nodded slowly, as if her words confirmed something he'd already suspected. "What's the bail set at, Sheriff?" Harlan's eyes narrowed. "Ain't set one. She's awaiting trial." "Every prisoner has the right to bail unless they're charged with murder," Flynn countered. "That's territorial law." The tension in the small office thickened. Harlan clearly hadn't expected to encounter someone who knew the law and was willing to challenge him. "Fine," the sheriff spat. "Bail's set at $200. Madeline's heart sank. It might as well have been $2,000. Nobody paid that kind of money for a stranger, especially not a woman accused of theft. To her astonishment, Flynn didn't even blink at the exorbitant amount. He reached into his vest and pulled out a leather wallet, counting out the bills with deliberate precision. $200, he said, placing the money on the desk. I trust that covers it. Harlan stared at the money, then at Flynn, trying to understand the cowboy's motives. She'll be your responsibility. If she flees before trial, you forfeit the money. Understood, Flynn replied evenly. Now, I believe you have some paperwork to process and a cell to unlock. For the next 15 minutes, Madeline sat in stunned silence as the deputy processed her release papers. Flynn Quinn stood by the window, occasionally glancing her way but otherwise keeping his own counsel. When the cell door finally creaked open, she found herself frozen, unable to believe this sudden turn of events. Come along, Miss Lewis, Flynn said gently. My horse is waiting. Finding her voice at last, Madeline asked, Why would you do this? You don't know me. Let's discuss that once we're clear of town, he replied, offering her his coat as they stepped outside. The late afternoon air felt intoxicatingly fresh after the stale confines of the jail. Flynn helped her onto his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, and swung up behind her. They rode in silence until Redemption Creek's weathered buildings disappeared behind them. Only then did Madeline feel the tension begin to leave her body, though uncertainty quickly filled the void. I can't repay you, she said finally. Not that amount of money. I didn't ask for repayment, Flynn replied. But I do need help at my ranch, as I said. The housekeeper left last month to care for her ailing sister. If you're willing to cook and keep house until your trial, we'll consider it an even trade. Madeline turned slightly to study his face. And if I don't want to, then I'll take you to the next town over and you can make your own way, he answered simply. The bail money's paid either way. She considered his offer. A job and shelter seemed far better than the alternatives. Why help me at all, Mr. Quinn? Flynn's expression darkened. I've seen Harlan's type before, men who use their badge to bully instead of protect. He paused. My sister suffered at the hands of such a man. I couldn't help her then. Perhaps I can make amends by helping you now. The raw honesty in his voice convinced Madeline more than any elaborate explanation could have. I accept your offer, she said, and I'm a good cook, so you won't regret it. A ghost of a smile touched Flynn's lips. We'll see about that. It's another few hours' ride to the ranch. Rest if you can. Exhaustion from weeks of poor sleep on a hard jail cot overcame her wariness. Madeline found herself leaning back against Flynn's solid chest as they rode, the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves lulling her into a doze. She woke to Flynn gently saying her name. The landscape had changed to rolling grasslands with mountains visible in the distance. Ahead of them stood a substantial log house with several outbuildings, corrals, and a barn all well maintained. Welcome to Raven Creek Ranch, Flynn said as they approached. An older man emerged from the barn, his weathered face breaking into a smile as he recognized Flynn. About time you got back. Was beginning to think you'd found trouble in town. Found something, all right, Flynn replied, dismounting before helping Madeline down. Manuel, this is Miss Madeline Lewis. She'll be helping with the housekeeping. Miss Lewis, this is Manuel Vasquez, my foreman and the best horseman this side of the Rockies. Manuel tipped his hat to Madeline. Madam, it'll be nice having a woman's touch around here again. Flynn led Madeline inside the house, which was clean but showed signs of bachelor living functional rather than comfortable. It's not fancy, he apologized, but it's solid. Your room is upstairs, first door on the right. The previous housekeeper kept it tidy. The bedroom was simple but clean, with a real bed that looked like heaven after the jail cell. A small wardrobe stood against one wall, and a washstand with a pitcher and bowl occupied another corner. There's a bathroom down the hall with a proper tub, Flynn explained. I had it put in last year, one of my few luxuries. I'll have hot water brought up so you can wash. Then perhaps you'd like to rest before dinner? Madeline nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Flynn, please, he corrected. We don't stand on ceremony here. He hesitated at the door. I meant what I said about your options, Miss Lewis. You're not a prisoner here. The doors aren't locked, and there's a horse you can use if you decide to leave. After he departed, Madeline sank onto the bed, her emotions a tumultuous mix. relief at escaping the jail ward with uncertainty about her situation. Flynn Quinn seemed honorable, but she'd learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. A young ranch hand delivered hot water as promised, and Madeline indulged in her first real bath in weeks. She washed her hair and scrubbed away the jail's grime, feeling more human with each passing minute. The dress she'd been wearing was beyond salvaging, but in the wardrobe she found several simple dresses left by the previous housekeeper. One of them, a faded blue calico, fit her well enough after some adjustment. When she ventured downstairs, she found Flynn in the kitchen attempting to make coffee. "I hope you can do better than this," he said ruefully, gesturing at the bitter-smelling pot. "I've many skills, but cooking isn't among them." "Let me," Madeline offered, taking over. Within minutes, she had a fresh pot brewing properly. "Do you have supplies for dinner? I could prepare something." Flynn showed her the pantry, which was reasonably well stocked. "Manuel keeps us supplied from town, but we've been living on basics lately." Madeline assessed what was available and set to work. By the time Manuel and 2 other ranch hands came in from evening chores, she had a hearty stew simmering, biscuits baking, and applesauce warming on the stove. "Smells like heaven," Manuel declared, washing up at the sink. "Boss, you found yourself a treasure." Dinner was a revelation for all of them. The men ate enthusiastically, clearly appreciating a home-cooked meal after months of rudimentary fare. Flynn ate more quietly, occasionally glancing at Madeline with what looked like reassessment in his eyes. After the meal, as Madeline began clearing dishes, Flynn stopped her. "You've done enough for today. The boys can clean up." Despite her protests, he insisted, sending her to rest while the ranch hands took care of the kitchen. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Madeline reflected that it was the first time in her life that men had done housework on her behalf. The next morning, Madeline woke with the dawn, feeling truly rested for the first time in weeks. She dressed quickly in another of the previous housekeeper's dresses, this one green, which complemented her eyes, and went downstairs to prepare breakfast. To her surprise, Flynn was already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, frying bacon. "Good morning," he said. "Thought you might appreciate sleeping in." "I'm an early riser," she replied, moving to help. "Though I'm not used to finding the man of the house cooking," Flynn shrugged. "I lived alone a long time before hiring a housekeeper. I can manage the basics." He handed her the spatula. "But I won't turn down your help." Working together, they prepared a substantial breakfast. Flynn was methodical in the kitchen, following her instructions without complaint. By the time the ranch hands arrived, the table was laden with food. "What are your plans for the day?" Madeline asked as they ate. "Moving cattle to the north pasture," Flynn replied. "They've about grazed out the east section." He glanced at her. "Feel free to familiarize yourself with the house. There's a list of supplies we need from town in my office. If you could add whatever you need for the kitchen, Manuel will make a trip tomorrow." After breakfast, Madeline explored the house properly. It was larger than it appeared from outside, with 4 bedrooms upstairs, a study, a formal dining room, and a comfortable parlor that showed little sign of use. Everything was functional but plain, suggesting Flynn invested in quality but not ornamentation. In the study, she found the supply list he'd mentioned. As she added kitchen items, she noticed a photograph on the desk. Flynn standing beside a young woman with similar features. His sister, she guessed, remembering his comment about being unable to help her. The remainder of the day passed quickly as Madeline tackled the accumulated housework. She dusted, swept, and reorganized, finding satisfaction in bringing order to the neglected spaces. By late afternoon, she transformed the main rooms, adding small touches like wildflowers in a jar and rearranging furniture to better catch the natural light. When Flynn returned that evening, he paused in the doorway, taking in the changes. "You've been busy," he observed. "I hope you don't mind," Madeline replied, suddenly anxious that she'd overstepped. "Not at all," he assured her, removing his hat and hanging it on the peg by the door, a small gesture that emphasized he was truly home. "It feels warmer somehow." Dinner that night was less awkward than the previous evening. The ranch hands shared stories of their day, including an amusing tale about a particularly stubborn calf. Flynn spoke little but seemed more at ease, occasionally commenting or correcting exaggerations with dry humor. Later, as Madeline was tidying the kitchen, Flynn brought in a final cup of coffee. "May I ask you something, Miss Lewis?" "Madeline, please," she corrected, mirroring his earlier request for informality. "And yes, you may. How did you end up in Redemption Creek?" The question was direct but not unkind. Madeline dried her hands and sat at the table, gathering her thoughts. "My parents died of influenza last year in Missouri. I was their only child, and after settling their affairs, there wasn't much left. I'd heard women could find decent work out west as teachers or shopkeepers." Flynn nodded, encouraging her to continue. "I had enough money for the journey and a little to start over. Redemption Creek wasn't my destination, but when the stagecoach stopped there, I saw the mercantile had a help wanted sign. Mr. Fletcher, the owner, hired me on the spot." She paused. "Things were fine until Sheriff Harlan started coming around. At first, he was just watchful. Then he began making suggestions. When I refused him, he became angry. 2 weeks ago, he accused me of stealing from the till." "Did Fletcher stand up for you?" Madeline shook her head. "He's afraid of Harlan. Most people in town are. And then the sheriff arrested you," Flynn concluded. "Yes. He said he found stolen items in my room at the boarding house, but it was a lie." Anger colored her voice. "He planted them there. I know he did." Flynn considered this. "The trial is in 3 weeks. That's what the deputy said, but Harlan controls everything in that town. I doubt the judge will hear my side fairly." She looked directly at Flynn. "Why did you really help me? The truth, please." Flynn's blue eyes met her steadily. "I was in Redemption Creek on business buying cattle from a rancher outside town. While having a drink at the saloon, I overheard talk about the pretty thief in jail. The men speaking seemed to think Harlan's treatment of you was some kind of joke. Their description of the situation didn't sit right with me." He took a sip of his coffee before continuing. "The next morning, I asked around town. Several people, when speaking privately, admitted they thought you were innocent but were too afraid to say so publicly. So you decided to pay my bail, just like that. I have resources, and I believe in using them to right wrongs when I can," Flynn said simply. "But I meant what I said about needing help here. It's not charity." Madeline studied him, trying to reconcile this unusual man with her experiences. Most men she'd encountered wanted something from women, especially women in vulnerable positions. Yet Flynn Quinn had given her shelter, work, and dignity without apparent ulterior motives. "I'm grateful," she said finally, "for all of it." Flynn nodded once, accepting her thanks without embellishment. "Good night, Madeline." "Good night, Flynn." In the days that followed, Madeline settled into life at Raven Creek Ranch. The work was plentiful but satisfying. She cooked, cleaned, mended, and gradually put her own stamp on the household. Flynn gave her free rein, approving her suggestions for improvements and providing funds for fabric, kitchenware, and other necessities. The ranch hands Manuel, young Thomas, and the quiet, competently treated her with respect that bordered on reverence after experiencing her cooking. They took to removing their hats and boots before entering the house and made efforts to wash up properly before meals. Flynn himself remained something of an enigma. He worked alongside his men from dawn until dusk, returning tired but always taking time to clean up before dinner. Their conversations grew easier, though he rarely spoke of personal matters. Occasionally, Madeline would catch him watching her with an unreadable expression that made her heart beat faster. 1 week into her stay, Madeline was hanging laundry when she noticed a rider approaching at speed. Flynn emerged from the barn, hand on his holster, relaxing only when he recognized the visitor. "Martin," Flynn greeted the man, who dismounted with obvious urgency. "What brings you out from town?" "News from Redemption Creek," Martin replied, nodding a greeting to Madeline. "Thought you'd want to know. Sheriff Harlan's been asking questions about where you took the Lewis woman." Flynn's expression hardened. "Did he now? And what's his interest, given that I paid her bail legally? Word is he's claiming the money was counterfeit." Says he's got a right to retrieve his prisoner. Madeline felt the blood drain from her face. Flynn glanced her way, his jaw tightening at her obvious distress. The money was genuine, as Martin well knows since he witnessed the transaction, Flynn said calmly. This is harassment, pure and simple, Martin nodded. That's why I rode out to warn you. Harlan's been drinking heavily and making threats. Some think he might come out here. Let him try, Flynn replied, his voice dangerously quiet. I appreciate the warning, Martin. Will you stay for lunch? The visitor declined, saying he needed to return to his own ranch. After he departed, Madeline approached Flynn, her hands trembling slightly. He's coming for me, isn't he? Flynn turned to her, his expression softening. Not if I have anything to say about it. Harlan may be sheriff in Redemption Creek, but he has no authority here. This is Laramie County, different jurisdiction entirely. But what if, Madeline, Flynn interrupted gently, I won't let him take you, I give you my word. Something in his tone, absolute certainty combined with protectiveness, calmed her fear. Flynn Quinn was not a man who made promises lightly, she'd learned. That evening, Flynn called a meeting with all the ranch hands. Harlan might try something, he explained. I want watches set and everyone armed. Manuel nodded grimly. The man's a dog, we'll be ready. Madeline felt both grateful for their protection and guilty for bringing trouble to their door. I should leave, she suggested quietly after the others had gone to their posts. This is my problem, not yours, Flynn regarded her steadily. Running would only confirm guilt in people's eyes. Besides, where would you go? I don't know, she admitted. But I can't bear the thought of anyone getting hurt because of me. No one's getting hurt, Flynn assured her. Harlan's a bully and bullies typically back down when confronted. Get some rest. Your room's the most secure in the house. Despite his reassurance, Madeline slept poorly that night, startling at every sound. Morning came without incident, however, and the next day passed uneventfully. By the third day, some of the tension had eased, though the ranch hands remained vigilant. 5 days after Martin's warning, Madeline was teaching Thomas how to make proper biscuits when they heard horses approaching. Flynn and Manuel were checking fence lines in the north pasture, leaving only Thomas, Illy, and Madeline at the ranch house. Illy appeared at the kitchen door, rifle in hand. Stay inside, madam. Thomas, get your gun. Through the window, Madeline could see 3 riders approaching Sheriff Harlan and 2 men she didn't recognize. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to remain calm. I'm not hiding, she told Illy, wiping flour from her hands. This is about me and I won't cower while you face them. Illy didn't look pleased but nodded reluctantly. Stay behind us at least. The 3 men stepped onto the porch as Illy and Thomas positioned themselves in the doorway, rifles ready but not aimed. This is private property, Illy called out. State your business. Harlan swaggered forward, his badge prominently displayed. I'm here on official business. That woman behind you is a fugitive from justice. I paid her bail legally, came Flynn's voice as he rode in from the eastern pasture, Manuel beside him. They dismounted quickly, moving to flank the house. She's here lawfully awaiting trial. Harlan's face darkened with anger. The money was no good, Quinn. I'm taking her back. That's a lie, Flynn replied evenly, and you know it. Martin Freeman witnessed the transaction. The Territorial Bank verified the funds. Are you calling me a liar? Harlan's hand moved toward his gun. I'm stating facts, Flynn said, his own hand nowhere near his holster. Miss Lewis remains here under my protection until her trial date. If you have concerns about the bail payment, take it up with the court. One of Harlan's companions shifted uncomfortably. Sheriff, if the money was verified by the bank. Shut up, Davis, Harlan snapped, his eyes, bloodshot and wild, fixed on Madeline. That woman's coming with me one way or another. No, she isn't, Flynn stated, his voice holding absolute authority despite its quietness. You're trespassing on my land, Harlan. I'm asking you politely to leave. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds before Madeline stepped forward. I'll speak for myself, she said clearly. Sheriff Harlan, I am not going anywhere with you. You arrested me on false charges because I rejected your advances. You're abusing your position, and I will testify to that at my trial. Harlan's face contorted with rage. You lying little, careful Harlan, Flynn cut in. Choose your next words with extreme care." Something in Flynn's tone, or perhaps the fact that he was now outnumbered 5-3, finally penetrated Harlan's anger. He looked around, seeming to realize his disadvantage for the first time. "This isn't over," he growled, backing toward his horse. "You'll regret crossing me, Quinn." "And you," he pointed at Madeline, "you'll be back behind bars where you belong." "Good day, Sheriff," Flynn replied coolly. "Safe journey back to Redemption Creek." They watched in tense silence as Harlan and his men rode away. Only when the riders disappeared from view did Flynn turn to Madeline, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "Yes, thank you, all of you." Flynn studied her for a moment. "You showed courage standing up to him like that." "It wasn't courage," Madeline replied. "I'm just tired of being afraid of him." That evening, after dinner, Flynn invited Madeline to join him on the porch. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, casting long shadows across the land. "Harlan won't give up easily," Flynn said after they'd sat in companionable silence for several minutes. "He's the type who can't stand being defied, especially by a woman." "I know," Madeline acknowledged, "but I can't keep running forever." Flynn turned to face her. "I've been thinking about your trial. The judge who's coming through is Judge Samuel Morrow. I know him, he's fair and honest. If we can present your case properly with witnesses to Harlan's behavior, there's a good chance of clearing your name." "Witnesses?" Madeline asked skeptically. "No one in Redemption Creek will speak against the sheriff. Perhaps not openly, but Martin says there are several women who have had similar experiences with Harlan if someone approached them carefully." Madeline considered this. "Even if they agreed to testify, it would be their word against his. A sheriff carries a lot of weight with a jury." Flynn smiled slightly. "Not when the sheriff is caught in a provable lie. I had a thought about that too. The items he claimed you stole, did you ever see them?" "Only briefly when he showed them to Mr. Fletcher, a silver watch and a pearl necklace. Fletcher said they'd been in a display case." "Interesting," Flynn mused, "because according to Martin, those items are still missing. If Harlan had genuinely recovered stolen property, it should have been returned to the mercantile." Madeline's eyes widened as she understood the implication. "You think he planted different items to frame me but kept the real stolen goods? It's worth investigating," Flynn replied. "I've asked Martin to look into it discreetly." They sat quietly for a few minutes, watching the last light fade from the sky. Stars began appearing, brilliant against the deepening blue. "Flynn," Madeline said softly, "why are you going to such lengths to help me? The truth, please." He gazed at her thoughtfully before answering. "At first it was because I recognized an injustice and had the means to address it. I've seen too many people with power abuse those without." He paused. "But now it's because I care what happens to you, Madeline, more than I expected to." The simple admission sent warmth spreading through her chest. "I care about you too," she confessed. "These past weeks, despite everything, have been special to me." Flynn reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused from years of ranch work, but his touch was gentle. "Whatever happens with the trial, I want you to know you have a place here for as long as you want it." Madeline interlaced her fingers with his, a gesture of trust and growing affection. "Thank you." The days that followed brought a new dimension to their relationship. Nothing was said explicitly, but small gestures accumulated. Flynn bringing wildflowers from his rides, Madeline setting aside books she thought he'd enjoy, lingering conversations after the ranch hands had retired for the evening. They worked well together, developing an easy rhythm as they went about their respective responsibilities. Flynn began inviting Madeline to ride with him in the evenings, showing her the extent of his property, the crystal-clear creek that gave the ranch its name, the meadows filled with wildflowers, the grove of cottonwoods where he sometimes went to think. During one such ride, they stopped by the creek to rest the horses. Flynn helped Madeline dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "It's beautiful here," she said, looking around at the rippling water and the mountains in the distance. "Yes," Flynn agreed, though his eyes were on her, not the landscape. "Very beautiful." Madeline felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. The attraction between them had been building steadily, but neither had acted on it. She sensed Flynn was being cautious, perhaps concerned about the power imbalance in their situation. "Flynn," she began hesitantly, "I want you to know that I'm here because I choose to be, not because I feel obligated or because I have nowhere else to go." He studied her face, his blue eyes serious. "Are you sure about that? You were in a desperate situation when I found you. I wouldn't want to take advantage." "You haven't," she interrupted. "You've been nothing but honorable, too honorable, perhaps." A slow smile spread across his face. "Too honorable?" Madeline gathered her courage. "Well, I've been waiting for you to kiss me for days now." Flynn laughed softly, the sound warming her more than the afternoon sun. "Have you indeed?" He stepped closer, one hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. "I wouldn't want to keep a lady waiting." When his lips finally met hers, Madeline felt as though something long missing had clicked into place. The kiss was gentle at first, almost questioning, then deepened as she responded enthusiastically. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, while her hands found their way to his shoulders, feeling the strength there. They broke apart eventually, both a little breathless. Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I first saw you smile," he admitted. "Why did you wait so long?" she asked, her fingers playing with the hair at the nape of his neck. "I needed you to be sure, to know your own mind without pressure or obligation." His expression grew serious. "I don't take matters of the heart lightly, Madeline. When I care for someone, it's completely," she nodded, understanding. "I feel the same way." They kissed again, more confidently this time, before reluctantly agreeing they should head back to the ranch before dark. As they rode, their horses side by side, Madeline felt a happiness she hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever. Despite the uncertainty of her legal situation, she had found something precious and unexpected with Flynn Quinn. The next week brought news from Martin. He discovered that the supposedly stolen items had indeed never been returned to the mercantile. Furthermore, he'd convinced two women to speak confidentially with Judge Morrow about Harlan's pattern of harassment. "It's building a case," Flynn explained as they discussed the developments over dinner. "If we can prove Harlan fabricated the theft, your other accusations become more credible." Madeline nodded, but anxiety still gnawed at her. "The trial's in 4 days. What if it's not enough?" Flynn reached across the table to take her hand. "Then we'll face it together, but I have faith in Judge Morrow's integrity." "And if I'm convicted, you won't be," he insisted. "But if the worst happened, I'd move heaven and earth to clear your name, I promise you that." His determination bolstered her courage. That night, as had become their custom, they sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge. Flynn had his arm around her shoulders, and Madeline leaned comfortably against him. "Tell me about your sister," she said softly. "You mentioned her that first day, but you've never spoken of her since." Flynn was quiet for so long that Madeline thought he might not answer. Finally, he sighed. "Her name was Fiona. She was 4 years younger than me, bright, stubborn, full of life." "Was." "She died 7 years ago," he said, his voice tight with old pain. "She married too young to the town marshal in the Colorado mining town where we lived. I was working as a trail guide then, often away for weeks at a time. I didn't see how he changed after the wedding, how he isolated her." Madeline squeezed his hand encouragingly. "By the time I realized something was wrong, the abuse had been going on for months. She hid it well, the bruises, the fear. When I confronted her, she broke down and told me everything." His jaw clenched at the memory. "I went to the town elders, but they wouldn't believe that their respected marshal could be beating his wife. They thought I was causing trouble, making things up." "What did you do?" "I tried to convince Fiona to leave with me to start over somewhere else." She was ready to go, had packed a small bag. His voice faltered. "Her husband caught us. There was a struggle. His gun went off." "Oh, Flynn," Madeline whispered, her heart aching for him. "He claimed it was an accident, that I had attacked him and she got in the way. The town believed him. I was run out with threats of hanging if I returned." Flynn's eyes were distant with remembered pain. "I later heard he told everyone she'd been depressed and shot herself. No one questioned it." "That's why you reacted so strongly to my situation," Madeline realized. You saw history repeating itself, Flynn nodded. When I heard about you, something inside me couldn't let it happen again, watching someone with authority abuse their power and get away with it. He looked down at her, his expression softening. But helping you was never just about my sister, Madeline. From the moment I met you, there was something about your courage, your dignity despite your circumstances. I admired you instantly. Madeline reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I'm so sorry about Fiona. And I'm grateful that you found me. He turned his head to kiss her palm. As am I. The day before the trial dawned clear and cool. Flynn had arranged for Martin to escort them to the territorial courthouse in Laramie, wanting to avoid passing through Redemption Creek where Harlan might try to interfere. As they prepared to leave, Madeline felt her anxiety returning. She'd packed the best of the dresses she now owned, including a new blue one Flynn had ordered from Laramie specifically for the trial, but her confidence wavered. Flynn found her in her room, staring out the window. Having second thoughts, she turned to him with a strained smile. Not second thoughts, just fears. What we're attempting is dangerous. If Harlan realizes we're gathering evidence against him, he can't touch us in Laramie, Flynn assured her. And Judge Morrow has already agreed to hear the testimonies in his chambers privately before the trial begins. Madeline nodded, trying to take comfort in his certainty. I just wish it was over. Flynn crossed the room to take her hands in his. Soon it will be, and then we can focus on the future. Our future, she asked, needing the reassurance. His eyes, warm and sincere, met hers. Yes, our future. Whatever you want that to be. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. I want to be here with you. I want to build something lasting. Then that's what we'll do, he promised, kissing her forehead. First, we clear your name, then we build that future together. They rode out an hour later, Flynn and Madeline in the wagon with their luggage, Martin accompanying them on horseback. The journey to Laramie would take most of the day, and they planned to stay at a hotel there overnight before the trial the next morning. Madeline watched Raven Creek Ranch recede behind them with mixed emotions. In just a few short weeks, it had become more of a home to her than anywhere since her parents' house in Missouri. The thought of not returning filled her with dread. Flynn seemed to read her thoughts. It'll be there waiting for us, he said quietly. I hope so, she replied. The journey passed without incident, though they remained vigilant. Laramie was considerably larger than Redemption Creek, with proper streets, substantial buildings, and a bustling commercial district. The hotel Flynn had chosen was modest but clean, with separate rooms for propriety's sake. That evening, Martin brought news that Judge Morrow had agreed to meet them early the next morning before court convened. The witnesses from Redemption Creek had arrived safely and were staying with Martin's sister. Try to rest, Flynn advised Madeline after dinner. Tomorrow will be challenging, but I have faith it will end well. She tried to follow his advice, but spent much of the night awake, rehearsing what she would say to the judge and worrying about facing Harlan again. When morning finally came, she dressed carefully in the blue dress, arranging her hair neatly and pinning it up in a style that conveyed respectability. Flynn looked handsome and distinguished in a dark suit she'd never seen him wear before. You clean up nicely, Mr. Quinn, she teased, trying to lighten her own mood. As do you, Miss Lewis, he replied with a warm smile. Ready, Judge Morrow was a tall, thin man with penetrating gray eyes and a reputation for fairness. He received them in his chambers, listening attentively as Martin presented their evidence regarding the allegedly stolen items. The two women from Redemption Creek testified next, describing Harlan's pattern of harassment and intimidation. Throughout it all, the judge remained impassive, asking occasional clarifying questions but giving no indication of his thoughts. When Madeline recounted her own experience, he paid particularly close attention, noting specific details about the items Harlan had claimed she stole. This is troubling, he said finally. Very troubling indeed. Sheriff Harlan has been in his position for 8 years with no formal complaints against him. People are afraid to speak out, Your Honor, Flynn explained. He's created a climate of fear in Redemption Creek. Judge Morrow nodded thoughtfully. I'll need to consider this information carefully. Miss Lewis, you understand that officially you are still charged with theft and assaulting an officer? Yes, Your Honor, she replied steadily. Very well, the trial will proceed as scheduled. I thank you all for bringing these matters to my attention. As they left the judge's chambers, Madeline felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. Do you think he believed us? I do, Flynn said. Morrow's known for being thorough. He'll want to observe Harlan during the trial, see how he handles questioning. The courtroom was nearly full when they entered. Redemption Creek might be small, but news of a scandal traveled fast. Madeline saw several familiar faces from town, including Mr. Fletcher from the Mercantile, who avoided her eyes. Sheriff Harlan sat at the prosecution table, looking confident and official in his best uniform. He smirked when he saw Madeline, his expression saying clearly that he expected to win. The trial began with the reading of charges. Harlan testified first, presenting his version of events, how he'd caught Madeline stealing from the Mercantile, how she'd attacked him during the arrest, and how he'd found the stolen items in her room. When asked to produce the evidence, however, he faltered. The items are in safekeeping at my office, he claimed. The defense attorney, whom Flynn had hired from Laramie, pounced on this. Yet Mr. Fletcher, the Mercantile owner, states the items were never returned to him. Is that not standard procedure, Sheriff? Harlan flushed. I was waiting until after the trial. For 6 weeks, the attorney pressed. And can you explain why no formal inventory of these items exists in your records? The questioning continued relentlessly. With each answer, Harlan became more defensive and inconsistent. When Mr. Fletcher reluctantly testified that he'd never actually seen Madeline take anything and had only Harlan's word that she was the thief, the sheriff's case began to crumble visibly. The final blow came when Martin produced documentation from the Territorial Bank confirming the bail money Flynn had paid was legitimate currency. Harlan's claim that it was counterfeit was proven to be a blatant lie. Throughout the proceedings, Judge Morrow watched with keen attention, occasionally making notes. When all testimony had been heard, he called a brief recess to consider his verdict. You did wonderfully, Flynn whispered to Madeline as they waited. He's seeing through Harlan's lies. She squeezed his hand. I couldn't have done this without you. When Judge Morrow returned, his expression was grave. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, I find the defendant, Madeline Lewis, not guilty of all charges. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Madeline sagged with relief against Flynn, who put his arm around her supportively. Furthermore, the judge continued, silencing the room, I find substantial evidence of misconduct by Sheriff Harlan Baker. I am ordering an immediate investigation into his actions as sheriff, and he is suspended from duty pending the outcome. Harlan jumped to his feet. You can't do that. This is a conspiracy. Silence, Judge Morrow thundered. One more word, Mr. Baker, and I'll hold you in contempt. Bailiff, please escort the former sheriff out. He is to return to Redemption Creek and surrender all official property to his deputy until the investigation is complete. As Harlan was led away, protesting loudly, Madeline felt an overwhelming sense of vindication. It wasn't just her word against his anymore, the truth had prevailed. It's over, Flynn said, his voice filled with satisfaction. Your name is cleared. Tears of relief filled her eyes. I can hardly believe it. Outside the courthouse, they thanked Martin and the witnesses for their courage in coming forward. Judge Morrow approached them as the others departed. Miss Lewis, Mr. Quinn, he acknowledged. This case has revealed concerning patterns that extend beyond today's proceedings. I'll be appointing a special investigator to review all of Baker's cases from the past several years. Thank you, Your Honor, Flynn replied. Justice was served today, the judge nodded. Indeed it was. Good day to you both. As they walked toward their hotel, Madeline felt lighter than she had in months. What happens now? She asked. Flynn smiled down at her. Now we go home. The word home resonated deeply with Madeline. Raven Creek Ranch had become her home in ways she'd never anticipated. And the man beside her had become essential to her happiness. They left Laramie the following morning, traveling at a leisurely pace. Without the pressure of the trial looming over them, they could enjoy the journey and each other's company. They stopped for a picnic lunch by a stream, talking about plans for the ranch and their future. "I've been thinking," Flynn said as they sat side by side on a blanket, watching clouds drift across the sky, "about building an addition to the house. The east side gets wonderful morning light. It would make a perfect sitting room." Madeline smiled, recognizing this was his way of saying he wanted her to stay permanently. "That sounds lovely, perhaps with large windows to capture the view of the mountains. Exactly what I was thinking." He took her hand, his expression growing serious. "Madeline, these past weeks have shown me what was missing in my life. Not just a housekeeper, but a partner, someone to share everything with, the work, the decisions, the quiet evenings." Her heart quickened. "I feel the same way." Flynn shifted to face her directly. "I know it hasn't been long, but when something is right, you know it. I love you, Madeline Lewis. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had sensed the conversation was heading in this direction, the actual words still took her breath away. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I would love to be your wife." His smile was radiant as he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I got this in Laramie," he explained, opening it to reveal a simple but elegant gold ring with a small diamond. "It's not fancy, it's perfect," she interrupted, holding out her hand for him to slip the ring onto her finger. "Just like you," Flynn laughed. "I'm far from perfect, but I promise to love you completely for the rest of my days." Their kiss sealed the promise, sweet and full of hope for the future they would build together. When they arrived back at Raven Creek Ranch the next day, Manuel, Thomas, and Ali greeted them enthusiastically, having already heard about the trial's outcome through Martin's messages. Their obvious happiness for Madeline's vindication and the couple's engagement made the homecoming even more special. That evening, after a celebratory dinner prepared by Manuel, giving Madeline a night off from cooking, she and Flynn sat on their porch swing, watching the stars come out just as they had so many nights before. But now, with her head on his shoulder and his ring on her finger, everything felt different, more certain, more permanent. "When shall we have the wedding?" she asked, tracing patterns on his palm. "Whenever you like," Flynn replied, "though I admit I'm not inclined to wait long." Madeline smiled. "Neither am I. Perhaps next month. That would give us time to prepare properly, but not so long that it feels like an eternity." "Next month it is," he agreed, kissing the top of her head. "We can ride into Laramie next week to arrange for the minister and order whatever you need for your dress." They continued planning, talking about who to invite. Manuel would give the bride away, they decided, and what flowers might still be blooming for bouquets. The practical details grounded the fairy tale feeling of their engagement, making it real and tangible. As darkness fell completely, Flynn pointed out constellations, telling her the stories behind each one. Madeline listened, content in a way she hadn't known was possible. From the nightmare of false imprisonment to this dream of love and acceptance, the journey had been unexpected but had led her exactly where she was meant to be. "I never thought I'd be grateful for being locked behind those iron bars," she mused, "but if I hadn't been, we might never have met." Flynn's arms tightened around her. "Then I'd have spent my life searching for something I couldn't name, because now that I've found you, Madeline, I can't imagine a world without you in it." She turned her face up to his, finding his lips in the darkness. Their kiss was a promise of love, of commitment, of a future bright with possibility. Whatever challenges might come, they would face them together, strengthened by the unlikely circumstances that had brought them to each other. Under the vast Wyoming sky, on the porch of what was now truly their home, Flynn and Madeline embraced their future, no longer separated by iron bars or circumstance, but united by a love that had overcome every obstacle in its path. True to their plan, they married 4 weeks later in a simple but beautiful ceremony at Raven Creek Ranch. Madeline wore a dress of ivory silk ordered from Laramie, and Flynn looked handsome in a new black suit. Manuel proudly escorted her to where Flynn waited beneath an arch of autumn flowers and branches. The ranch hands had outdone themselves preparing for the celebration, cleaning and decorating the property until it shone. Several neighboring ranchers attended, along with the women from Redemption Creek who had testified at the trial. Judge Morrow himself made the journey to perform the ceremony, commenting that it gave him particular satisfaction to unite two people who had stood so firmly for justice. News had reached them a week before the wedding that the investigation into former Sheriff Harlan had resulted in multiple charges, including evidence tampering and abuse of power. He awaited trial in the territorial prison, his days of intimidation finally over. As Flynn and Madeline spoke their vows beneath the clear blue sky, with mountains in the distance and their friends gathered around them, the journey that had brought them together seemed both miraculous and inevitable. From a desperate prisoner to a beloved bride, from a lonely rancher to a devoted husband, their paths had converged in a way neither could have predicted, but both now cherished beyond measure. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Morrow declared, beaming at the couple. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Quinn." Flynn didn't hesitate, drawing Madeline into his arms and kissing her with a tenderness that made several of the female guests dab at their eyes, when they turned to face their friends as Mr. and Mrs. Flynn Quinn. The cheers and applause echoed across the valley. The celebration continued into the evening, with music provided by a fiddler from a neighboring ranch and dancing on the packed earth of the yard. Lanterns hung from trees cast a golden glow over the festivities, and the autumn air was crisp but not uncomfortably cold. Later, as the party continued around them, Flynn led Madeline away from the crowd to a quiet spot near the creek. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. She looked up at him, her heart full to bursting. "More than I ever dreamed possible." "Good," he murmured, touching his forehead to hers, "because making you happy is my life's work now." "Then you're off to an excellent start, Mr. Quinn," she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Above them, stars filled the vast Wyoming sky, silent witnesses to promises kept and a love that had flourished against all odds. Once, iron bars had defined Madeline's world. Now, her only boundaries were the horizon and the endless possibilities of a future with Flynn. As winter settled over Raven Creek Ranch, Flynn and Madeline established the rhythms of their married life. The addition to the house progressed steadily, with Flynn and the hands working on it whenever weather permitted. By Christmas, the new sitting room was enclosed, though finishing details would wait for spring. Their first holiday as husband and wife was simple but meaningful. They decorated a small pine tree cut from their own land and exchanged modest gifts, a handcrafted leather-bound journal from Madeline to Flynn, and a delicate gold locket from him to her. "Open it," he encouraged as she admired the necklace. Inside, she found a tiny pressed wildflower, the same kind he had brought her during her first weeks at the ranch. "You kept this all this time?" she asked, touched by the sentiment. "I pressed it the day I realized I was falling in love with you," Flynn confessed. "I wanted something to remember that moment." Snow fell heavily that winter, often keeping them housebound for days at a time. Far from finding this confinement tedious, Madeline treasured the quiet hours with Flynn reading aloud by the fire, teaching each other card games, planning improvements for the ranch in the coming year. In late January, during a particularly fierce blizzard, Madeline woke feeling unwell. The nausea passed quickly, but returned the next morning and the next. It was Manuel's wife, Maria, visiting from their small home at the edge of the property, who first suggested what might be happening. "When was your last monthly time, Senora?" she asked gently after finding Madeline resting in the middle of the day. Madeline calculated quickly, then looked up with widening eyes. 6 weeks ago, at least, do you think?" Maria smiled knowingly. "I have 5 children, I recognize the signs." That evening, Madeline shared her suspicion with Flynn. His initial shock quickly transformed into joy so profound it brought tears to his eyes. "A baby," he whispered, placing his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though his expression left little doubt. "Beyond words," he assured her, gathering her close. I never dared hope for this much happiness. Spring brought renewal to the land and confirmation of Madeline's pregnancy from the doctor in Laramie. The ranch flourished under their combined care. Flynn's practical knowledge of cattle and land management paired perfectly with Madeline's organizational skills and attention to detail. They expanded the garden, adding vegetables and flowers that would thrive in the Wyoming climate. Madeline took particular pleasure in creating a home that reflected both their personalities. Flynn's appreciation for functionality blended with her eye for beauty and comfort. As her pregnancy progressed, Madeline remained active, though Flynn insisted she delegate the more strenuous household tasks. Their evenings often found them discussing names for the child and planning for the future, not just the immediate needs of a baby, but dreams for the years ahead. "I want our child to grow up knowing they're loved completely," Flynn said one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively over the growing swell of her abdomen. "To never doubt they belong here." "They will," Madeline promised. "Between your strength and my stubbornness, our child will have everything they need to thrive." Flynn chuckled. "Your stubbornness? I believe you mean your determination." "Call it what you will," she replied with a smile. "It served me well in that jail cell, and it will serve our child well too." The memory, once painful, had lost its sting. They could now speak of that time almost fondly, recognizing it as the unlikely beginning of their journey together. In early August, as summer heat lay heavy over the land, Madeline went into labor. Flynn sent Thomas riding for the midwife in the neighboring valley, while Manuel's wife Maria helped prepare the bedroom with clean linens and hot water. The labor was long and difficult. Flynn remained by Madeline's side throughout, holding her hand through contractions, wiping her brow and encouraging her with words of love and support. When she thought she couldn't continue, his steady presence gave her strength. "You're the bravest person I've ever known," he told her as dawn broke on the second day. "Just a little longer, love." Shortly after noon, their daughter entered the world with a robust cry that immediately captured her parents' hearts. She had Flynn's blue eyes and a wisp of Madeline's auburn hair, tiny perfect features that they examined with wonder. "She's beautiful," Flynn whispered, cradling the infant with careful hands that dwarfed her small form. "What shall we name her?" Madeline smiled tiredly. "I was thinking Fiona after your sister, Fiona Hope Quinn." Tears filled Flynn's eyes. "Are you sure?" "Very sure," Madeline confirmed. "Her name should honor the past while looking toward the future." Flynn leaned down to kiss his wife's forehead, then the top of their daughter's downy head. "Fiona Hope," he repeated softly. "It's perfect." News of Fiona's birth spread quickly through the neighboring ranches. Gifts arrived: hand-knitted blankets, preserved fruits, small handcrafted toys. The community that had welcomed Madeline now embraced her child as well, expanding the circle of love and protection around the Quinn family. As summer faded into autumn, Madeline found motherhood both more challenging and more rewarding than she'd anticipated. Sleepless nights tested her endurance, but the small milestones, Fiona's first smile, the way her tiny hand curled around a finger, brought joy beyond measure. Flynn proved to be a devoted father, taking the baby for early morning walks so Madeline could rest, singing old trail songs as lullabies and speaking to Fiona as though she understood every word. "I'm telling her about the ranch," he explained when Madeline found them by the window one evening, Flynn pointing out features of the land while Fiona gazed up at him. "She'll know every creek and hill before she can walk." "Just like her father," Madeline observed with a smile. Flynn glanced up, his expression softening. "And she'll have her mother's courage and heart. Between the two, she'll be unstoppable." 1 year to the day after their wedding, they held a small celebration combining their anniversary with Fiona's christening. Judge Morrow returned to Raven Creek Ranch for the occasion, bringing news that Harlan Baker had been sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison for his crimes. "Justice comes in its own time," the judge observed as he watched Flynn with his family. "But seeing you three together, I'd say it came exactly when it was meant to." That evening, after their guests had departed, and Fiona was sleeping peacefully in the cradle Flynn had crafted for her, husband and wife stood on their porch, arms around each other as they looked out over the land that had become their shared legacy. If someone had told me 2 years ago that being locked behind iron bars would lead to this, Madeline mused, I'd never have believed them. Flynn turned to her, framing her face with gentle hands. From the moment I saw you in that cell, I knew you were exceptional. I just didn't realize how completely you would transform my life. We transformed each other, she corrected, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. And now we're building something that will last long after we're gone. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about the past they'd overcome and the future stretching before them. The ranch house glowed with warmth behind them, sheltering their sleeping daughter and embodying the home they'd created together. From iron bars to open skies, from solitary confinement to the boundless freedom of love, Madeline's journey had led her to exactly where she was meant to be. In Flynn's arms, under the vast Wyoming heavens, she was finally completely free.